Carl Jung, why lack of support is your secret power. Rage you feel toward this rigged world isn't a toxic flaw, but a terrifying weapon. They lied to keep you paralyzed. Listen closely to the very end, because the brutal truth hidden inside your deepest resentment is about to make you psychologically indestructible. The silent agony and the illusion of the borrowed self. Have you ever looked into the mirror and felt a creeping, sickening realization that the societal promises you were force-fed are nothing but a beautifully decorated, rigged game? We are relentlessly conditioned to believe in a fair world, to swallow the comforting delusion that sheer willpower alone can seamlessly bridge the terrifying gap between the penthouse and the pavement. But I am here to expose a brutal, devastating truth that polite society is utterly terrified to look in the eye. Human starting lines have never been, and will never be, equal. There is an excruciating, bottomless chasm between beginning your life with a golden safety net intricately woven beneath you and being forced to walk a fraying tightrope from absolute zero, or worse, from a crushing, suffocating negative. While the privileged are propelled by a perpetual tailwind of financial backing and inherited connections, those born into scarcity must fight a visceral war against gravity with every single step. The sheer existential dread of surviving without a margin for error creates a dark vacuum in the soul, a silent, repressed agony that eats you alive from the inside out, while the world demands you simply smile and hustle harder. If you have ever felt your soul fracturing under the weight of this unspoken injustice, you must listen closely to what I am about to reveal. Because the truth at the end of this dark corridor will brutally shatter everything you thought you knew about your own mind, forcing you to look at your trauma not as a curse, but as an awakening. Before we tear down these comforting societal illusions together, I ask that you hit that subscribe button right now. Your subscription is the raw, vital fuel that allows us to keep digging into these dark, unspoken psychological depths, giving us the power and motivation to continue bringing you these life-altering, unapologetic truths in the future. Warmly welcome to the inner multiverse. We live in an era heavily poisoned by a culture of toxic positivity and blind mechanical productivity. When you are quietly drowning in circumstantial deficits, the modern world throws hollow, superficial slogans at you like cheap anesthetics. Just work harder, no excuses, grind until you win. I have watched countless individuals internalize these lies, desperately trying to slap a psychological band-aid over a deep existential hemorrhage. Plunging headfirst into an endless cycle of manic busyness does absolutely nothing to resolve the gnawing dread at the core of your being. It is merely a desperate escape mechanism, a frantic attempt to fill a spiritual void with mechanical exhaustion. You simply cannot fix a architectural collapse of the human soul with superficial time management tricks or the shallow platitudes of modern self-help. To truly dissect this agonizing disparity, we must abandon modern rhetoric and look through the unyielding, profound lens of entity people. Carl Jung warned us of a tragic, pervasive phenomenon that walks among us every single day, yet goes entirely unnoticed: the borrowed self. I want you to look very closely at the radiant, effortless confidence of those individuals who were born at the finish line. In the vast majority of cases, that confidence is not an authentic core forged through the searing fires of adversity. It is nothing but a fragile, hollow scaffolding, entirely constructed from foreign, external materials. They define their entire identity through the wealth of their parents, the societal status they merely inherited, and the default, unearned validation of a sterile environment. Their ego is a magnificent illusion, a house of cards protected by a climate-controlled bubble. This scaffolding looks breathtakingly imposing on a sunny day. But the absolute, terrifying nature of anything borrowed is that you never truly own it. I have seen the devastating aftermath when the external variables abruptly vanish, when the economic market collapses, when family prestige burns to ash, or when a random chaotic tragedy strips away their external pillars. In an instant, that borrowed self disintegrates. Their towering confidence evaporates into thin air, leaving behind a bewildered, fragile entity completely defenseless against the unapologetic blows of reality. Their strength was never an internal capacity. It was merely a reflection of the cushion beneath them. For you, the individual rising from the ashes of scarcity, you never had the luxury of that scaffolding. The agonizing absence of that safety net is the very source of your silent pain. But it is precisely this agonizing void that births an incredibly fierce, liberating reality. Because you have absolutely nothing to borrow, you are universally condemned and ultimately blessed to build it yourself. Descending into the shadow of resentment and the raw furnace of scarcity, he profound blessing hidden within this condemnation of starting from nothing, we must first dare to look into the darkest, most terrifying corners of our own resentment. When you are forced to scrape and claw for the absolute bare minimum while watching others glide effortlessly toward their ambitions, a deep, venomous bitterness begins to take root in your psyche. Society, in its endless hypocrisy, commands you to suppress this bitterness, branding it as jealousy or a toxic mindset that will only hold you back. But I am telling you to look at it closely, because this very resentment is the gateway to what entity people. Carl Jung, our shadow, contains all the rage, the profound sense of unfairness, and the silent screams of exhaustion that you swallow every time you force a polite smile while someone born on third base offers you oblivious, patronizing advice on how to hit a home run. You have been taught to feel ashamed of this anger, to bury the sheer, visceral hatred you feel toward the gaping disparity of your existence. Yet, burying it is precisely what causes the soul to fracture. We walk through life carrying this heavy, invisible burden, desperately trying to mask our profound exhaustion with the facade of resilience. You lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of knowing that one medical emergency, one lost job, or one unpredictable crisis could send you spiraling back into the abyss. There is no wealthy family member to bail you out. There is no inheritance waiting to soften the blow. The sheer terror of this reality breeds a unique kind of psychological exhaustion that the privileged will never, ever comprehend. They look at your fatigue and call it a lack of ambition. They look at your caution and call it a limiting belief. But you and I know the truth. It is the hypervigilance of a soldier who has never been allowed to take off their armor. By refusing to acknowledge the agonizing reality of the shadow, you deny yourself the very fuel required for your psychological liberation. Jung taught us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your rage at the societal machine is not a flaw. It is a perfectly rational, deeply human response to a systemic trauma. It is the suppressed scream of your authentic self demanding to be recognized. When you finally stop running from this anger and stop apologizing for your bitterness, you reclaim a massive reservoir of psychic energy. You stop trying to play by the polite, sterilized rules of a game that was rigged against you from the day you were born. You must let the raw, unfiltered agony of your scarcity burn away the illusions you have clung to. You must sit in the darkness of your own disadvantage and feel the jagged edges of your reality without reaching for the numbing agents of toxic positivity. This is not a descent into despair. It is a mandatory plunge into the deepest depths of your own truth. You are stepping into the furnace, and while the fire of your own shadow is unspeakably agonizing, it is the only element capable of burning away the paralyzing shame of your circumstances. The stripping of illusions and the brutal path of individuation, running from that blinding rage, and allow the searing heat of your own shadow to consume you. You step onto the agonizing but necessary path of what entity, people. Carl Jung Individuation is not the glossy, marketable version of finding yourself that modern gurus sell in weekend retreats. It is a brutal, relentless stripping away of everything you thought you had to be. For those of us born into the deficit, our earliest survival mechanism was mimicking the behaviors, the speech, and the aspirations of those who belong to the world of privilege. We desperately tried to construct our own version of the borrowed self, hoping that if we dressed the right way, spoke with the right cadence, and hustled with enough manic intensity, we could somehow buy our way out of the void. We thought the goal was to finally climb high enough to build our own climate-controlled bubble. But the tragedy of the disadvantaged soul is that even when you manage to acquire the material markers of success, the terrifying imposter syndrome only amplifies. Because deep down, you know you are wearing a costume. You are trying to graft a synthetic, inherited identity onto a soul that was forged in the trenches of survival. The path of individuation demands that you violently tear down this ill-fitting facade. You must grieve the reality that you will never have the effortless, naive lightness of those who have never known true hunger. You must mourn the childhood that was stolen by adult anxieties and the peace of mind that was sacrificed on the altar of mere survival. This process is intensely lonely. As you begin to shed the superficial coping mechanisms and the desperate need for societal validation, you will feel a profound, echoing emptiness. You are no longer the frantic hustler driven by the fear of poverty, but you have not yet discovered who you actually are in the absence of that fear. This is the dark night of the soul. You are standing in the rubble of your own defensive walls, completely exposed to the elements. Yet, it is only in this terrifying state of psychological nakedness that true self-discovery begins. You realize that you do not need to be a polished, untraumatized version of yourself to be worthy of existence. The scars of your scarcity, the hyper-independence, the cynical edge that polite society told you to soften, these are not defects to be eradicated. They are the intricate, battle-tested components of your unique psyche. Individuation is the radical acceptance of your entire fractured history. It is the realization that your trauma is not a dirty secret to be hidden behind a perfectly curated Instagram feed, but the very soil from which your authentic power must grow. You stop looking upward at the penthouses with envy, and you finally look inward, realizing that the chaotic, messy, profoundly resilient entity you are becoming is infinitely more fascinating and complex than the sterile, prepackaged identities of the elite. You are no longer trying to escape your past. You are looking it dead in the eye and demanding it yield its hidden wisdom. The psychological alchemy of transforming void into unbreakable substance, and this terrifying, desolate void of having no external savior, that the most profound psychological alchemy begins to take place. Alchemy, in the Jungian sense, is not about turning physical lead into gold. It is the miraculous, agonizing process of transmuting the heavy, suffocating lead of human suffering into the indestructible gold of profound psychological substance. When you are stripped of illusions and forced to confront the harshness of your reality, a fundamental shift occurs in your internal architecture. The privileged individual relies on external pillars, money, status, networks, to hold their psyche upright. When the storm comes, they pray the pillars hold. But you, having survived the agonizing realization that there are no pillars coming to save you, must become the architect, the mason, and the stone yourself. Every single time you were knocked to the pavement and had to drag yourself back to your feet while the world looked the other way, you were unknowingly mixing the mortar of your own soul. Every humiliation you swallowed, every door that was slammed in your face because you lacked the right pedigree, every terrifying night you spent calculating how to survive the month, these were not merely episodes of suffering. They were the intense, pressurized environments required to forge diamonds in the human psyche. You begin to realize that the disadvantage of having to build everything from scratch is actually the ultimate psychological advantage. You know exactly how the foundation of your confidence was poured because you bled into it. You know the exact load-bearing capacity of your own mind because you have repeatedly tested it against the crushing weight of utter despair. This is the birth of authentic, unshakable confidence. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not need to constantly boast or seek external validation like the fragile, borrowed egos of the fortunate. It is a quiet, deadly stillness. When a crisis hits, an economic downturn, a devastating personal failure, a sudden chaotic collapse of circumstances, the individual with the borrowed self shatters into a million pieces. They have no internal map for navigating the abyss because they have never lived there. But you? The abyss is your old neighborhood. You know its streets, you know its shadows, and you know exactly how to walk out of it. When the external world burns down, you do not lose your identity because your identity was never tied to the external world in the first place. Your substance is entirely self-generated. This psychological alchemy turns your greatest vulnerability, the lack of a safety net, into your most terrifying weapon. You develop a radical, almost intimidating self-reliance. The world can take away your job, your money, and your status, but it absolutely cannot confiscate a resilience that was manufactured in the dark. You stop fearing failure because failure is no longer a death sentence. It is just another raw material for your internal furnace. The very pain that was supposed to destroy you has been completely metabolized, converted into a deep, unwavering reservoir of personal authority. You no longer walk into a room hoping to be accepted by those who hold the keys to the kingdom. You walk in knowing that you are a kingdom unto yourself, built on a foundation that can never, ever be foreclosed upon. The indestructible core and the awakening of the authentic soul architecture hardens into an indestructible core. The very world that once seemed like a rigged, suffocating cage transforms into a vast landscape of absolute psychological freedom. This is the ultimate awakening. You finally see the grand cosmic irony of the societal hierarchy. The people you once envied, the ones who seem to glide through life on a golden escalator, are actually the most fragile inmates in a prison of their own making. They are eternally tethered to the external conditions that validate their existence, living in perpetual unspoken terror of losing the things they never truly earned. But you have crossed the threshold. You have walked through the fire of your own shadow, dismantled the desperately constructed false self, and alchemized your profound trauma into an unassailable inner fortress. You have achieved what entity people call Carl Jung of the self, a state of being where you are entirely whole, deeply rooted in your own truth, and no longer at the mercy of the world's unpredictable tides. In this awakened state, you no longer harbor the bitter resentment that once consumed you. It simply dissolves, not because you have adopted some fake, enlightened positivity, but because you genuinely no longer desire what the privileged have. You realize that to trade your life for theirs would mean trading away the profound depth, the fierce empathy, and the undeniable strength that you have painstakingly forged. You look at your scars and feel an overwhelming sense of reverence. The agonizing void of your beginnings was not a curse meant to bury you. It was the empty canvas required for you to paint your own masterpiece. The universe did not give you a safety net because it demanded that you learn how to fly. Your journey from the pavement is no longer a story of victimization. It becomes a beacon of transcendent power. When you speak, your words carry the heavy, undeniable resonance of lived truth, cutting straight through the superficial noise of the modern world. People are inexplicably drawn to you because in a world entirely populated by synthetic, borrowed selves, an authentic, self-authored soul is a mesmerizing anomaly. You possess the rare capacity to look into the eyes of another suffering human being and offer them not shallow platitudes, but the profound, grounding presence of someone who has navigated the darkness and returned with the fire. The game may still be rigged. The starting lines will always be unequal, and the world will continue to reward the superficial over the substantial. But none of that matters to you anymore. You have won the only game that actually matters, the mastery of your own mind. You have transformed the agonizing silence of scarcity into a roaring symphony of triumph. You stand on the earth not as a victim of circumstance, but as a sovereign architect of your own destiny, forever possessing the quiet, magnificent certainty that no matter what heavens fall or what hells open up beneath you, you will not break. You cannot break, because the self you have built belongs to you and you alone for all of eternity. And finally, conclusion. The journey from profound scarcity to unshakable self-mastery is not a path of merely acquiring what you were historically denied. It is a brutal, transformative descent into your own psychological depths. It begins by confronting the shadow, the raw, suppressed resentment, and visceral exhaustion born from systemic disadvantage. Instead of burying this rage under the numbing agents of toxic positivity, you must allow its fire to burn away the borrowed self, the synthetic identity built to mimic the privileged world. This stripping of illusions initiates the agonizing but absolutely vital process of individuation. In the desolate void of having no external savior, a profound psychological alchemy takes place. Every trauma, rejection, and solitary crisis metabolizes into the indestructible mortar of an authentic soul. You stop relying on the fragile external pillars of wealth, pedigree, or status that the privileged depend upon, realizing instead that you have become the architect of your own unshakable internal fortress. Ultimately, the total lack of a safety net becomes your greatest, most terrifying weapon: absolute self-reliance. You awaken to the realization that the abyss of your disadvantage was never a curse meant to bury you, but the empty canvas required to forge a deeply resilient, sovereign identity. The universe denied you a safety net so that you could learn to fly, transforming the agonizing silence of scarcity into a triumphant masterpiece of self-authorship that no worldly crisis can ever dismantle. The profound lesson: true power and absolute security can never be inherited, bought, or granted by society. They must be forged in the furnace of your own adversity. The systemic disadvantages, psychological traumas, and agonizing struggles you have endured are not permanent defects. They are the exact raw materials required to build an indestructible, authentic self that cannot be shattered by the unpredictable tides of life. How to apply this to your life today? Stop apologizing for your scars. Instead of hiding your past struggles behind a mask of curated perfection, acknowledge the relentless resilience they have built within you. Your hyper-independence and hard-earned caution are survival tools. Refine them into profound wisdom rather than feeling ashamed of them. Dismantle the borrowed self. Stop measuring your worth by the metrics of those who started with a massive advantage. Actively define what a meaningful life looks like to you, completely devoid of societal expectations or the desperate need to prove your legitimacy to others. Embrace the abyss as training. When faced with a current hardship, a professional failure, or an unpredictable crisis, do not panic. Remind yourself that you have navigated the dark before. Treat the current challenge not as a threat to your existence, but as the necessary friction required to sharpen your psychological self-reliance. Question for you: looking back at your own unique journey, what is one major hardship or disadvantage you faced that ultimately made you mentally stronger? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Your perspective is highly valued, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to keep pushing forward. If you found value in this deep psychological dive, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is incredibly appreciated and gives us the powerful motivation needed to continue creating profound, high-quality content for you. Thank you for watching.